listening to Unfiltered with Muhammad Uncut, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening. Welcome to the Unfiltered Podcast. I have an unfiltered guest with us today, Jim Vinoski. Welcome and thank you for being our unfiltered guest.
Thank you, Mohammed. Glad to be here.
Really appreciate that you're with us. A little bit about my guest today. Jim Vinoski is a self-declared wannabe Renaissance man. We're going to ask you about that.
All right.
He's married and has 2 sons. He's an avid cyclist, a runner, a reader, a big World War II history buff who has never really gone over the 1980s fascination with heavy metal music. Might not go too deep on that one. And he brings over 30 years of experience in manufacturing, focus on engineering, operations, and management. He's also a Forbes Contributor and over 500,000 views to his pages. He knows a few things about leadership, and we're going to get into those today, and that's why he's our unfiltered guest. Welcome, Jim. Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
So, Jim,
thanks for a great intro, too.
Well, you're very welcome. I might not get into the whole World War II just yet or into the heavy metal. I guess I can go down to AC/DC and what my brother used to listen to in the 80s. I was more on Journey and maybe a bit Rush, but not quite into the AC/DC, right? So, right. But, if you want to talk about that later, I'll be more than happy if you can kind of let me know how heavy metal plays into the whole leadership thing. But where I do want to start, you know quite a bit about leadership. You've worked in the manufacturing area, and this is kind of your soft spot. So can you tell us, what does leadership mean to you?
Yeah, it boils down to really putting people in a position to succeed and working collaboratively with them to give them the best potential that they've got. So partly it's getting out of their way once you get them launched. It's letting people make mistakes and take on maybe greater responsibilities than they might be ready for. It's a lot about putting yourself aside and letting the person that you're supposedly leading shine.
So it's being the guide on the side and not necessarily the sage on the stage. Right. Why does it matter to you? Why do you care to bolster up others and see them succeed? Why should it matter to any of us?
Well, for me personally, I'm kind of lazy. And the better people I have working with me do, then the less I have to do, right? That's not entirely true, but there's a kernel of truth to that. Really, I've been in leadership positions for going on 20 years now, and I think I started off like a lot of new leaders do, kind of full of myself and thinking that I had to drag people and point people and tell people what to do. And fortunately, the ego didn't last too awfully long, and I started to realize how off-putting that was for the people, again, I was supposedly leading, and I wasn't really leading them that well. So I've been on my own education journey in understanding, where did I go wrong early on? What was I doing well? Was I not doing well? Just trying to improve my own style.
This podcast is all about being an unfiltered leader, and that means having a certain level of self-awareness, because if you can't start with yourself, if you can't do what you did, go through that journey of self-knowing and know what you're doing well, what you need to continue doing well, what things you need to start adopting or adapting to, and what things you need to stop because you'll lose people along the way.
Absolutely.
So it starts with that, but leadership can go a bit awry sometimes, right? As you're saying, I know I've been in a position. I was a person who was maybe younger in my years, late 20s, early 30s, and got into different leadership positions. And I thought it was about the loudest voice in the room, the biggest ego. The room wasn't big enough to hold me. And the language that I use was language that I heard similar leaders use, and therefore I was just copying what they were doing and saying.
Yep.
And I saw mouths go aghast when I would use language like, heads will roll. Because I heard that in a meeting, and I thought, hey, we're comfortable, so heads will roll. And people just looked at me like, did he just say that? And I'll never forget this. I hired a new person, and within days of being so excited to hire this expert instructional designer, about 4 days later, she left. It was after I made that comment. And, you get over it, but you don't. What I realized is, what a mistake. And what can I do to make sure that those sort of mistakes don't recur and don't become part of who I am? A lot of leaders don't quite get it. So can you tell us, have you ever done what I've done? I want to say put your foot in your mouth, but I did a lot. I put a bomb in my mouth, and it really shattered everybody on my team.
Absolutely. That's part of what I was talking about with my early style. And it's funny what you said about doing the things you'd seen other people do. I just find it hilarious that we've worked with people in our past that have made us feel like absolute crap, that have pulled our legs out from under us. And yet, because they were in a leadership position, we think once we get there, we've got to behave the same way. It's kind of a big miss that I think is very common. And you're right, a lot of people don't see that mouth falling open and people's eyes falling. If you're at all interested in improving, I don't see how you miss those signals, but people do. And it's unfortunate that we, in so many ways, keep alive these bad models from the past of, belittling people or constantly doing the ego thing and holding ourselves above them rather than building them up and giving them the tools they need.
Well, to your point, if the person is brave enough or confused or scared enough or surprised enough to actually react to your horrible leadership style, then you're kind of lucky because they're doing you a favor, right? It's a short-term pain for a long-term gain because you're saying, this isn't the response that I'm looking for, right? But a lot of the time what happens is those people are intimidated by your leadership style. They walk away feeling that they have to silently, do what you want them to do, but silently be penalized and be degraded. And it pulls them down. It's disempowering. It's demotivating. And that, I think, is really dangerous because you could go years without anybody calling you out. So, how, as a leader, do you create an environment where you say, call me out? If I screw up, I want you to be the first to tell me. How do we do that effectively? Is it that simple?
I don't think it's simple because I think there's always that kind of power relationship, and there's always going to be those people who report to you who feel like they should be deferential and they should kind of, in some cases, kowtow to your own beliefs and your own behaviors. But I think a big piece of it is just in treating people like equals. So much of this bad behavior goes to that hierarchy, and if you break that, if you really treat people as though they're your peers rather than your direct reports or, people who have to I'm sorry, my dog's barking.
No, it's all right. The wonders of COVID and working from home. I
know. But,
he just wanted to say, he has something to say.
Yeah, to chime in. He's a good leader too. He leads me all over the place.
There you go.
But yeah, so having people who you've put into a position where they feel empowered to speak up, both good and bad, because you need both ends of it. And so that's part of the leader's job, is getting people into that position where they're comfortable giving feedback.
So I want to go the other direction. I'm going to say, wait a minute. The minute we start allowing people to speak up and have a voice, they're just not going to shut up, and they're going to start telling us what to do, and there's going to be chaos, and work isn't going to get done, and it's going to be a matter of trying to get consensus, but nobody's on the same page. Isn't that what normally happens, or is that?
Not in my experience. There are certainly those people who get a little too comfortable with bending your ear and taking your time, and then you just have to be direct, right? another piece of what you have to get adept at is giving your own feedback and saying, look, I welcome and I value your input. We just got to kind of scale back on the frequency or the time.
So there's always a way to measure outcomes and to keep people accountable, right? So
Sure.
I think, and I think about really great meetings or really great interactions with others. It's set the expectations. I always say, let people weigh in and they'll buy in, but don't come with relevant ideas, come with
Right.
innovative and creative ideas, and then know how far you can take those ideas. And if they're not the ideas that we embrace and we want to move forward with, know that it's okay. You've been heard, you're seen, you're part of the team, but it may not be your idea. And so I think building that level of trust and camaraderie to say, we are in this together, but it doesn't always mean that you're going to get your way. Because I think what happens is when you create that level of, hey, yeah, this is great, right? Just that high level of camaraderie and familiarity, I think what happens is you lose a bit of the respect. And I don't just mean respect to a leader and authority. I mean respect that is reciprocal. It's a matter of saying, we're here to get a job done. We're here to make sure that we can get on time and that we can be successful, meet the requirements, don't go beyond the resource allotment and so forth. But we do this together. Where have things gone really wrong for you?
Well, before you move on, you said a word I think that is absolutely essential, and it's trust.
Trust.
That's such a huge element, building that mutual trust.
Well, take me there. How have you done it?
Again, I think it's really about meeting people where they live, meeting them on their own terms. We're all different. We all come from different places, different backgrounds. We talk about diversity, and we're not even scratching the surface yet. And I think that's where, as leaders, we really need to understand, we're never going to fully get another person. We're never going to be in their shoes. And so it really has to be about open, honest communication and interaction, and doing as much as we can do to learn about the people we work with, to value them for their unique abilities and what they bring to the table. And so when you show that you're honestly making those efforts, then I think you establish that trust and that rapport.
Completely. And it builds a bridge for you to listen, because there's no way that I can learn about you and what you bring to the table if I'm the one always talking or offering advice, or if it's always my idea. So good leaders need to lead by listening first.
That is absolutely true. But the other side of that coin is you also have to be willing to honestly share and open up. If we're all closed up and we're trying to be that perfect leader and never admitting we're wrong, never admitting we had struggles in the past, then we're not doing our best job as leaders either.
So that takes us to vulnerability. And this is something that always comes up in this unfiltered discussion that, leaders, especially men, and, most leadership positions changing, we want to change this, are dominated by men, and men who are from the dominant culture. So, when you talk about diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. We need to be proactively choosing to celebrate diversity and to encourage voices who are not like ours, right? Diversity has many different faces, and we'll never know them all, to your point. But by listening, we can start that conversation. Your flip side is by sharing. Some people may not feel comfortable in speaking up.
Right.
We need to listen to them and, maybe just turn around to them and ask them, what do you got to offer? So what is one area where you've struggled personally in your own leadership journey? You said you started out by thinking it was about the ego and the role and the authority. You're not there now. What was a turning point? Not
entirely, I hope.
What was the turning point for you?
Well, I think it was, in some level, a lack of confidence, a lack of assurance in my own ability to get the job done. And so, I think that's a part of what drives some of that, mimicking the bad behaviors of others, is we've seen them do that, and we've seen the business succeed under that, despite the badness of that kind of behavior. And so it's an easy fallback, right? Being the bully, being the kind of strong person in the room, like you said, the loudest voice in the room. People will do things, right? And so if you're convinced that that's the only way that you get people to deliver the goods, then it's an easy kind of automatic place to be. And I think where you break that is in understanding what the effect is on people. You can do that for so long, but the trouble is, as soon as you walk away, as soon as you stop that behavior, it all breaks down. And I think that's a piece of what my learning was, is that I was intimidating people and holding
it
myself
works.
out. Pardon?
It works.
It did for a while.
Right.
But I wasn't building my teams. I had people who were not happy being on the team, were not happy with being part of the organization because of what I was doing. And so, a piece of it was my personal growth to say, I've got my own ideas how this should be and how it can be better and how I can interact with people better. Had some great help from books. One of my favorites is by Professor Barry Brownstein. It's called The Inner Work of Leadership, and it's all about throwing the ego to the side. And literally, when I read that book, I got in touch with him and said, this is life-changing. It's not just about work and leadership. It's really about everything. And so, just getting those good outside influences plus, not being happy with what I was seeing around me led me to grow out of some of that.
And was it a pivotal turning point? Was there an aha moment, or was it an ongoing process where you were looking and saying, things don't smell good here? Or was it something that just happened all at once?
For me, it wasn't any kind of big pivotal moment. It was more the accrual of my early years experiences and seeing how the teams gelled and kind of the behavior being reflected back and things like that. And so I moved around a few times in my early leadership years and kind of had a chance to reset. And as I did those things and wanted to be really a better friend, not a better leader with the people on my team, that's when I really started thinking about that and realizing, despite my efforts to do my best, I was failing in a few regards.
Wow, I heard the F word and friend. Right? We don't say that often. Whenever I look at LinkedIn and those sort of platforms, words like love or faith or God or friend don't seem to have a lot of meaning or existence. People don't talk about spirituality. People don't talk about a higher force making a difference, or they don't talk about love. And then the odd one that you see, it has some, not so inspiring video about leadership or becoming a better person. It's kind of those, right? It's not something that's going to shake your stubborn arrogance, that's going to awaken you and say, wait a minute, I do have to lead with love. I have to be a leader who wants to befriend others. I can't go around stubbornly, arrogantly pretending that I have to be this ego-driven monster to get things done. And you know what? That does get things done. But to your point, things were getting done, but people weren't happy. They weren't healthy. We moved the ladders out of the way to make sure people aren't tripping, on ladders or carrying boxes wrong and hurting themselves, right? We don't think, we think about the physical space we have to protect. We don't think about the mental and emotional spaces where our employees work and their well-being. We're starting to. But the fact that we're in 2020 and still talking about it like it's a novelty, the fact that the pandemic has caused us to really shudder and shake and renounce this ego-driven monstrosity that it was all about profits and not people. I think that awakening, I hope it lasts, because I see now, you're in the United States, so you've just experienced summer and we forgot about COVID, but we're right now I'm in Canada, we're being reminded, I live in Ontario, there was 300 cases of COVID yesterday. It's spiking, I think as the virus is going to, God forbid, but resurface, people's level of humility and modesty is going to come back into them. The essential workers that we kind of cast aside, in June and said, hey, give back the extra $2 we were paying you over your minimum wage. You're less essential now. We're going to turn back to those people and say, where's my toilet paper, right? It's going to go further than that. Our words and our actions have to really make a lasting and consistent change, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's not the absolute worst advice that's out there, but this notion that a leader can't be friends with the people he leads, that's some of the absolute worst advice I've ever heard. It's utter nonsense. And I get where it comes from. You're not going to be friends because then you won't be able to give honest feedback or have the difficult conversations, but that's just absurd.
It's probably because you're friends that you can have the honest feedback and give.
You would think, right? Yeah, well, and should you be a leader if you can't both be friends with someone and have an honest conversation about performance? That ought to be part of what you sign up for.
Let me clarify. You're not talking about getting together Friday nights and watching Netflix. You're talking about, what kind of friendship are you talking about here?
Honestly, I am talking about getting together Friday nights and watching Netflix. Now,
okay.
Not always, certainly not with everybody. You don't do that with everyone across the board in any situation. So it's certainly not going to be the case with your direct team either. But why should it be a problem if there's a few people that you do hit it off like that with? Now, then you have to be very careful about the message you're sending to the other team members that you aren't quite as close to. But it should be manageable. But it is much more about the generic, we can be friends, we can have common interests. I go bicycling with people at work, including people who report to me, and that shouldn't be a problem at all. I don't understand.
You take it to the level of humanity.
Love, you said it.
Love,
right?
Yeah. And, you lead with love. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it should be part of our workplace every bit as much as it's part of our home life. Maybe not to the same extent, but
why are we so afraid to talk about love or to lead with love at work? Why?
I don't know, and I don't think it's always been that way. I find it interesting every year when I watch A Christmas Carol, the movie, and we get to the part where they have the big Christmas party at work, and clearly the place is filled with love, right? They're all friends. And yet today we can't do that because we're so much smarter and we're all miserable.
It's the message of love that changed the story and that gave the story credence, right? It's that message of love. I think, it goes back, and I hear this often, it's putting profits over people. I mean, every company wants to be successful, but not on the backs of the people that work there, right? I work with a lot of companies that, we talk about what their vision, mission, and value should be, right? And the discussions we're having as well, we need to be client driven, but why can't we be driven for the client as well as the team, as well as the community? Why does it have to be either or? Why can't it be that, the people that are flipping the Big Macs and making the food to pass out, to people driving through the driveway, the drive-through, those people matter, because if it wasn't for them making the Big Macs, there's no service, nobody's coming into my store, right? And then those people, when they get a smile and then they get, value and they get a good meal, they're going to come back to you and to your particular store, right? They're not going to go to the one 2 miles down the street. They'll come back to your establishment, right? But then word gets out in the community that you make a difference. I look at, whatever coffee you drink. I don't just go and buy a particular brand from a particular store. I go to see a particular barista who knows my name, who knows I don't put the name Muhammad on my copies. I just put the letter M, right? I'm really disciplined about my name doesn't go in garbage, right? So it's about the person that has taken the effort to know me, to recognize me, even when I have the mask on, and to say, is this what you're getting today, Mohammed? That level of familiarity, maybe I'm not watching Netflix with the barista, but I could.
Yeah.
And you're right that where we become equals. It's not about my role and I'm more than you. And I think the higher up we go in the organization, the more service we need to give, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, what is your greatest awakening moment to something that has gone well that you've done as a leader?
Well, I think a big piece of it here lately has just been the team that I work with and how well they've done through the crisis. I don't publicize my day job, but I'm still involved in manufacturing, leading a couple of different teams in different locations. And, it was crazy. We do food production, and when they shut down the restaurants and everyone started buying from grocery stores and cooking at home, our demand skyrocketed. And for a couple months there, it was just everything we could possibly make, and we were barely keeping up, and people were working lots of overtime, extra days, all during the time when everyone's very nervous and fearful about what this means and what their risk is and all of that. And just to see these teams step up and deliver those goods and keep showing up day in, day out, even with the discomfort and with the fear, and really deliver throughputs that we've literally never seen before, daily volumes that were above even our busiest season through the year normally. It just said, the efforts of the past several years in building those teams and going through everything we just talked about of building relationships and building those people up to where they knew they could do the job. This is where the payoff comes for everybody.
What a difference when you gave the example of you could lead and lead authoritatively, and it's your ego telling people how to get things done, when to do it, and why. Maybe not even the why, but just get it done. And then when crisis hits and when things go sideways in an organization, let's forget the pandemic right now. Things go sideways and backwards every day, right?
Right, yep.
But they had your back because you had their back. You had that trust. And, they probably thought I'm working for a friend or with a friend and not a boss.
I hope so. But I know one thing for certain is they felt like they could make their best effort. And if we fell short, it wasn't going to be me ranting and raving and blaming them. It was going to be, okay, we did our best. Now let's move on to what's next and do our best with that.
Right. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier about your ability to be reflective and that level of self-awareness. We need to exercise that when we're working with others, have awareness of their needs and their wants and their expectations. So things, don't go like planned. What am I going to do? Am I going to lose it and abuse it? Or am I going to be there and have a conversation and recognize that we're human and we're going to make mistakes, but what can we do differently? What can we do better?
Right. Yep. Yeah. And that's a very good point. It should never be about blame. That gets you nowhere. It should always be that looking forward. Okay, this time we screwed up. How do we make it where that doesn't happen next time?
And it's an ongoing process, Jim.
Always.
I always, before we got on this call today, I went into the garage. My wife's not home yet. And she put a couple binders for my daughter, for my son's school. And I almost slipped on the stairs because the binders were literally on the stairs. And I thought to myself, why would she do that? And my inner critic started talking about conversation I was gonna have with my wife about why does this garage look like this, right? If she listens to this podcast, I'm fired. So, and then I thought to myself, wait, perhaps the conversation should be more like, I realize that you're busy these days and the garage needs some work. What can I do? Do you need help? First of all, it's not her responsibility, but assuming that, she put the books there and they shouldn't have been there. She didn't do it out of ignorance.
Yeah.
What could I do? Say, hey, can I help? I noticed that right? You're busy, or can I help where do you want these books to go? Or, right, I mean, that was pretty straightforward. Just move them out of the way. But a lot of the time, it's easy to blame. It's, I'm going to point at you and say, why did you screw up? How could you do that? Whereas maybe I just need to go back to what you were saying earlier. Just lean in, listen. Hey, tell me what happened.
Yep.
What can we do differently, right? And I think if we don't reach that level of self-awareness, we're always going to resort to our comfort zone and what's easiest, and the path of least resistance, which is, why the hell are these books in the way? I almost broke my neck, right? As opposed to just move them and offer assistance. And I think good leaders have to do that consistently. Maybe they're not able to do it all the time, but do it most of the time, right?
Right.
You mentioned, you're driven. What values drive you? What values keep you in check and help you keep that level of awareness? And I can see the modesty in the way that you express yourself. So what values drive you to maintain that friendability with your staff?
Well, so, I think I'm really smart. And yet I'm also smart enough to know that there's never going to be a time where, if there's more than one other person in the room, that I'm smarter than both of them, or all three of them, or all four of them put together. And so knowing the limitations of your own abilities and your own knowledge is a big key. And realizing that to truly get the value of the team, it's about getting everyone to participate and everyone to value their own input so that they'll offer it up, and collectively then we're as strong as we can possibly be. The other piece of it too is I realize that one of the biggest jobs of a leader is developing the next set of leaders. And so if you're not demonstrating what we've just spent a half hour talking about, how are they going to learn that? How are they going to avoid falling into that trap I fell into of mimicking bad behaviors? I want to exemplify the good behaviors that I hope they'll even learn more about when they come along and do better than I did.
So you work for the Boys Club. It's about protecting your turf and making sure that nobody's going to replace you. You're irreplaceable. The company just can't make do without you, right? But that's what I see a lot of leadership is like. It's the Boys Club. No girls allowed. No softies allowed. This conversation wouldn't happen in those groups, right?
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm in a place now where that's not the case. And we even have official corporate training where I work that's very much about leading from the heart and a lot of the concepts that we've talked about. But yeah, I've worked in places, even some places that are highly touted for leadership, where it was very much the political and, don't you dare cross me or I'm going to get you kind of stuff. The things that were tolerated in these places that were supposed models of leadership were just appalling. And it's part of what made me realize that I didn't want to be that way, is feeling how awful I felt being treated like that by supposed enlightened leaders.
Right. Well, the values don't mesh. And I always tell people, if you're applying for a job and you get asked questions, ask your own and ask what the values of the organization are. And if you might want that job really bad, but if the values don't mesh with your own, walk away. And conversely, that HR rep or hiring manager, if you're talking to somebody who's gifted, who's got all the skills, who's really smart, but their values don't mesh, you're a company that values diversity and inclusion and equity and access to leading from the heart, but this person comes in and talks about leadership from top down and so forth. Do you really want that person leading the people on your teams and bring that sort of toxicity to your organization?
Right.
They may be the great developer or the great manager, but they're not going to have people behind them, and they're not going to be able to create the next level of leaders, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly.
So yeah, values I think are really, really important. So you mentioned earlier a book. What is another book you can recommend to us? So what are one of your favorite readings?
Yeah, I'm a reader, so there's a lot of them. Bob Chapman's book is phenomenal. Everybody Matters. Have you read that one?
Not yet.
Yeah, those are two that I would highly recommend. Barry Brownstein's and Bob Chapman's. So Bob is the CEO of a company that really built itself up by purchasing a bunch of small companies. And he realized early on, as they were doing these acquisitions, that to make those acquisitions successful, they had to bring them into the parent company's values as quickly as possible. And he realized when he was going out and visiting these places that even though they had strongly trained people on values and talked about those values as they prepared to acquire companies, they really weren't living those values in the places out in the field. And so he made this very concerted effort to make the changes he saw needed to be made to truly value people and lead from the heart, and then to build that core culture to where they wouldn't have those misses again as they continued to purchase other companies and bring them into the fold. And it wound up, they established a sister company just to train and to teach those values to other companies.
You know, in my day job and in my night job, and what I think and talk about all the time, I'm a facilitator, so I do training, you know, training around leadership and personality and emotional intelligence and so forth. And what I see often is, you know, companies pay hundreds, thousands of dollars to train, and not only in the cost of the training, but the cost of pulling an employee off the floor to bring them into the room, but they don't invest in the behavioral change. So, you know, a trainer will tell you, well, you know, we want to see the change right after the training, but we want to make sure it sticks. We want to come back and, you know, in 3 weeks, and then in 3 months, and then in 6 months. And when you start having that conversation with a lot of organizations, they're not that invested. They want the cookie cutter change. You know, I want to create a leader in 6 weeks because they'll read a book and they'll take an online course and they're bequeathed leadership.
Right.
But, you know, it's a journey that sometimes can take up to a year to train that person and educate them. And, you know, even now we talk about diversity, we talk about anti-bias training and so forth. You don't change beliefs and systems overnight, right? It's a matter of looking at the things that drive our bias and why we behave in a certain way, and looking at those related values and how do you shift move the needle? How do you start shifting the pendulum a little further? You know, I read something today, somebody was sharing about we have to reverse the system of systemic racism. I said, I don't know if it's about reversing. You know, we have to write a new definition of inclusion by making sure that the table we're sitting at is open to people who have always been excluded, and not for us, the dominant culture or the privilege, to bequeath entrance, right, or acceptance to others. But we need to relax our dominance and allow others to penetrate into our conversation and have those discussions. And then we can write the new definition of inclusion together. And that will drive the system that we build. It's a complete dismantling and rebuilding. You know, our countries, our sister countries are, you know, you're in the States, I'm in Canada. Most of these countries were built on racism, systemic racism and colonization. What we've done to, you know, Black people and indigenous communities, we're still doing it today. A lot more aware, but our work is not done. And it impacts our leadership in corporations, right? It impacts the way that we treat people, whether they have an accent, whether they have a different name. How many times have you encountered in your, and I'm not putting you on the spot, but, you know, you get a resume that has a foreign name. So, you know, but if it was Alan or Joe, it might have a lot more relevance to you. I don't know if that's happened to you personally. It's happened to me many times, right? But it's about changing those systems completely, because we have to recognize, to your point that you made earlier, we're ego-driven. And systems can be driven by egos. They're egos that have taken years and centuries of building, and they're built on these concepts of inequality. So it takes a lot to recognize that. Tell me about your leading from the heart. You mentioned that you have training around leading from the heart. How have you brought that into your organization, and what sort of stick factor are you seeing?
Yeah, so, you know, I mentioned the book, that Bob Chapman book actually was given out at the first session of that training that I had. And I've made a point of bringing that back to my team, loaning that book out to people who are interested, talking about the values that it contained, to the extent of walking my leaders on my team through a set of just expectations around how we treat people, and making it clear that these expectations run top to bottom. Hold me accountable and hold every single person in our team accountable, top to bottom. Another piece of it too, to me, it goes so far beyond race and sex and all of that. Think about people without degrees. And I've had people who are just phenomenal performers, decades of experience, not even given an opportunity for a job because they didn't have a college degree. And it's like, that is so stupid. We're cutting our nose off to spite our face. Here's a guy or a woman who's demonstrated for years the ability to do this job, and that credential is going to, or lack thereof, is going to keep them from even being given a shot. Right. And that's ego too, right? Well, I had to go through college, so everyone else has to go through college to get where I'm at. That's just idiotic. And the solution we've already talked about too. It's about putting that ego aside, treating people as individuals, and learning that as leaders, if we're not valuing every single one of them, regardless how different they are from us, regardless, the different ideas they bring to the table that may be 100% opposite our own preconceptions, if we're not valuing that and encouraging that, we're not doing our jobs.
And that's powerful, because, that example that you shared, I don't think it's one that we hear often. We normally side with the person who's worked harder to get a degree, right? And, for those of who are listening, I'm entre parenthèses, how you say that in English, between quotes, right? So we say that you should have more value because you've invested in time and money to get a degree, right? But what if you're good, regardless of the piece of paper? What if the culture or the country where you grew up, or the county or the city where you grew up, you didn't have that access, but you can get the job done? So it's not just about our gender or our color or our linguistic capabilities or lack of. It can also be that, can I get the job done? And so again, it comes back to these basic values that who gets the job done best?
Right.
So strip out all that bias.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
The other piece I was thinking about while you were talking is, sure, the person who went to college put in a lot of effort and made sacrifices. What was that person who wasn't in college doing during those years when he or she would have been in college? A lot of them are doing things that are far and above the college experience in building character and building ability. And we give that no credence whatsoever, because at the end they didn't get handed a diploma.
And the message still is, the best person for the job, who can get the job done best, gets the job, right? So, but we put these basic requirements, and again, when you talk about creating and designing a corporate culture, when you create first the ego, because cultures have egos, organizations have corporate egos, right? When the ego is too big, we bring our ego to the room, but corporate cultures also have ego. And when there's a huge ego in the room, you can't allow for the diversity to fully be embraced. And you've got values that are maybe not only not attainable, but they're not realistic, and they're not the right set of values. So I think organizations need to be aware and respective. While we want to build a culture that is for the team, for the employee, and for the organization, those values need to reflect the best of those three as well.
Yep. Right.
Let me ask you, this is where I ask the guests to come up with a unfiltered thought of the week. So it's something that I share with the audience. What advice would you give somebody who's listening to this to help them become a better leader, a better person, a better individual, a better human being? What unfiltered piece of advice would you give them?
Get out of your own head. There's nothing wrong with feeling that your values are excellent values and that your work ethic is an excellent work ethic. But at the same time, you've got your own perception of what those things are and how they should work. And so to the extent you can put those aside and really look at what other people around you are doing, especially people who come from very different places, what they're doing, what they're bringing to the table, even though they might have ideas that are diametrically opposed to yours. What are they getting done? And how are they doing versus what we want to accomplish in the end? And I think a lot of people who, are hung up on the ego will be very surprised to find that there are people outperforming them who have totally different values and totally different education and totally different backgrounds. And I think the other piece is understanding what the narrow vision of those things can do to a person coming from a different place, and coming up with ways where you can expand the opportunity and the potential for that person to succeed.
When you say get out of your head, the first thing that came to my mind is get into your heart, or get into the heart of the other, right? And when you do that, whether you're getting into the head and the heart of the other, you're allowing for that diversity. You're allowing for creativity. It spurns the feeling that you want to be innovative. When you get stuck with your own head, and it's your ego first, when there's ego, right, there's no creativity. Yep. Because it's only your own vision. And, rarely is it about us, and rarely are we the only people on the boat, right? And if we're going to get somewhere and do something, we've got to take people along for the ride. So,
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for taking me along with you today, and for helping to engage in a conversation about what leadership looks like to you, and to help people become unfiltered. Because at the end of the day, this is about removing those filters and those masks, and no BS. It's being the best that we can. If you can't show up as a good human being who wants to make a positive change in the world, you can't do that at home. You're not going to be able to do it at work. You're not going to be able to do it in the community. You're just not going to do it at all. So thank you very much for sharing your insight with us, and I look forward to future conversations with you.
Thank you, Mohammed. I really enjoyed it. Yep, you too.
Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.